Hey everyone, Brian here from Native Instruments. In this video, we're going to be talking about the 10 tools that you will need as a beginner composer. We will start with the very basics of a computer, a DAW, virtual instruments, and we'll be working our way up the list to tools that allow you to combine video and music together and some mixing and mastering tools. So let's start with the first item on our list, a computer. The first and probably most important tool that you will need, besides a good musical idea, is a computer. This will be the digital brain when composing. The first thing to decide when getting a computer is, do you want to get a Mac computer or a Windows computer, which has always been a highly debated topic amongst the music community. Deciding to either go with an Apple computer or a Windows, a lot of it depends on personal preference. One of the contributing factors is what DAW do you want to use, which we will cover next. Fortunately, a lot of the digital audio workstations or DAWs are supported on both Mac and Windows computers. One of the exceptions is the DAW called Logic, which is only supported on Apple computers. Regardless if you decide to go with an Apple computer or a Windows computer, what is important is the technical specifications of this computer. How much RAM does it have? How much memory and what type of processing power does the computer have? Deciding how much RAM to get and how much memory you need, a lot of it depends on the software and the virtual instruments that you're going to be using when composing. For example, with most of the Native Instruments software, we recommend having at least a minimum of 6 GB of RAM and using an i5 processor. Having more RAM in your computer is going to allow you to run larger projects and run more instruments simultaneously. But again, it's not absolutely necessary. So if you are just beginning composing and you're just sketching out some ideas and really not using too many virtual instruments, you could get by using the minimum of 6 GB of RAM and at least the i5 processor. Fortunately, most of the computers that are being produced today, generally the minimum amount of RAM that comes installed is at least 8 GB. So just keep in mind that if you do have a very large project with 200 tracks and 200 virtual instruments, having more RAM and having more processing power is going to help this project run a lot smoother. If you're ever unsure of how much RAM you need or how much processing power, a lot of virtual instruments and DAWs in their tech specs and system requirements, they'll usually list what is the minimum RAM that they suggest and the minimum processing power. Having a computer is great, but how do you record the ideas that are in your head onto a computer? For that, what you'll need is a digital audio workstation, or what we call a DAW. In today's world, when people are talking about DAWs, they're generally talking about a program that lets you record and edit audio and MIDI, essentially a program that lets you write and compose music on a computer. There are already a lot of DAWs out there, and I'm sure there's going to be many more in the future. All of them have essentially the core features, the basics of what you would need in a DAW. For example, the ability to load and use virtual instruments and record and edit audio. Usually what separates one DAW from the next is certain features or workflows that are unique and specific to a particular DAW. For example, the ability to write automation on individual MIDI notes within inside of a chord, or maybe one of the DAWs has a one-of-a-kind synthesizer that no other DAW has. Even if you're a beginner composer or a professional, one feature that's very helpful to have is being able to load and play back video all within your DAW. Rather than having two separate programs, one running your video and then having your DAW run separately, being able to have both the video and your music contained within one program is going to be extremely helpful down the road. Some examples of popular DAWs in the composing workspace are Ableton Live, Logic, Cubase, and Pro Tools. All of them actually offer free trials, so you can experience the full features of the program without actually having to pay for it and commit to a particular DAW. There are other DAWs out there like Reaper or FL Studio. Even though they may not be as popular in the composing space, they're both DAWs, and whatever tool allows you to write music and compose as quickly as possible and allows you to get the ideas that are in your head onto the computer, that's really all that matters. As I mentioned before, some DAWs like Logic are only available for Apple computers. Previously, FL Studios was only available for Windows, but now they actually have a version for Mac. What can be extremely helpful is actually having a general understanding of how to use different DAWs out there. For example, you might be in a situation where you're writing with someone or you're in a studio and they use Pro Tools, whereas you use Cubase to write. Having a general understanding, even if it's just the basics of how do you load a virtual instrument into a program, is going to be very beneficial. There are other DAWs out there that I haven't mentioned, so just see what's out there, check out some of the free trials, and just see which DAW you feel most comfortable with. An important element to any composer's workflow is having a collection of virtual instruments. With virtual instruments, you can play pretty much any instrument in the world without actually knowing how to play it. With composing, you may need to write music for a wide range of scenes. Maybe you're working on an action scene or a love scene or a project that takes place in the future or the past. So it's important to have instruments that will fit these different types of scenarios. Many DAWs come with a vast library of built-in instruments, or what we call the factory library, and these are instruments that you're free to use and you don't actually have to purchase any additional sounds. For example, Logic comes with a ton of built-in instruments for you to use. There's some great samplers in here, there are synthesizers, orchestral sounds, and even in the library section, you can see these are all different categories that you can select for different types of sounds, from vintage B3 organs to synthesizers to a Steinway grand piano. Let's take a listen to the grand piano. For a factory library piano, that sounds pretty good. There are hundreds of other companies out there that make and sell virtual instruments for you to choose. There's a lot of them out there that are, just string libraries or synthesizers, but there's also companies out there that make really specific or unique sounding instruments. There are probably thousands of virtual instruments out there for you to choose from, but I would say one program that is an industry standard for composers is Kontakt. Kontakt 7 is a host program or a sampler and is used to run many of the instruments from Native Instruments. And there's also tons of other companies out there that use Kontakt to make and sell their products. So companies like Heaviosity, Output, Spitfire, all of them make and sell their own instruments, but Kontakt is the backbone. It's what they use to create their instruments. While you can get just Kontakt 7 Player, you can also get a free bundle of software called Komplete Start. This includes Kontakt 7 Player, plus over 2,000 sounds that are completely free. There's a handful of synthesizers, sampled instruments, effects, loops, and samples. So you can always get some additional sounds from Komplete Start, which again includes Kontakt 7 Player. One thing to note though is if you are purchasing virtual instruments from other companies, just double check in the tech specs and system requirements that these instruments will work with the player version of Kontakt. So as you can see from Spitfire with the Spitfire Chamber Strings Professional Library, it says that this works with Kontakt Player. As you can see, this library requires the full version of Kontakt and does not work with the player version. So always just double check and make sure which version of Kontakt you need. If you are looking to just get a very large collection of instruments, effects, loops, and one-shots, a great option is the Komplete 14 bundle. So Komplete 14 comes in 4 different flavors. There's Komplete 14 Select, Standard, Ultimate, and Collector's Edition, and each of them varies in size. So as you can see with the standard version, you have over 120 products. So this includes synthesizers, orchestral sounds, guitars, percussive instruments, expansions, which include loops and one-shots. So if you just want a large collection of sounds, every type of sound that you really need, the Komplete 14 bundle is definitely a great option. Just like DAWs, a lot of companies offer demo versions of their virtual instruments, so you can give it a try without actually having to purchase it. As an example, a lot of the instruments from Native Instruments offer demo versions, so you can try out some of the popular instruments like Massive X, or even try out one of the Kontakt libraries called Ashlight. If you're ever looking for more virtual instruments to use, some companies actually offer free instruments. So as I had mentioned, Komplete Start is a free collection of instruments and effects from Native Instruments, but another company that I love getting instruments from is called Spitfire Audio. They actually have this whole series called the Lab series, where these are all free instruments created by musicians. So you can get some really unique and cool sounding instruments from here, like voices, vintage drums, there's a foghorn instrument, cool cellos, and unique pianos. Let's take a listen to some of these instruments. So definitely check out other companies' websites, see if there's a free section, and you can always get more instruments that way. Pretty quickly, you might start developing this mentality of, I need every virtual instrument out there, or I just need this one instrument and that's the missing piece for me to create music. Now, while having every virtual instrument out there can seem beneficial, it can also be extremely overwhelming. You'll find that sometimes limiting the amount of tools and instruments that you're using, it'll actually expand your creative ability. It'll make you think outside of the box when it comes to sound design and choosing sounds for a particular project. So again, having every instrument out there can be great, but just start small, start with a couple, really learn how to use them. And then once you feel like you know how to use them, you can always go out and get more instruments. The more instruments and projects you have actually saved on your computer's hard drive, this is going to actually limit the amount of space that you have left on your hard drive. You might run into an issue where you just purchased a new virtual instrument, you go to install it, and your computer says not enough free storage space. One way to fix this issue is to get an external hard drive. Even just using an external hard drive to store saved projects on your computer, this is actually going to free up additional space on your computer to get and install more virtual instruments or just save more projects onto your computer. A common use in the composing space for external hard drives is actually storing your virtual instruments onto an external hard drive. There are some virtual instruments out there like Choir Omnia from Native Instruments that is over 70 gigabytes worth of audio samples. That is a very large instrument. Having your virtual instruments on an external hard drive, you're still able to use those instruments, but you're not taking up the 70 gigabytes on your computer's hard drive, but it's all being stored on the external. If the hard drive that you have built into your computer is fairly small, definitely investing in an external hard drive is going to free up a lot of space. In addition to having your virtual instruments on the external drive and projects, you can always add just regular audio samples to the drive. Basically, anything that you can do to free up your computer's internal storage is going to make your computer run a lot smoother. Both types of drives have the same purpose, being able to add on and have additional storage space on your computer. The difference between the drives is the speed at which data or information is transferred from the hard drive to the computer and vice versa. When loading instruments from an SSD, your instruments are going to be loading a little bit faster than if you were using a disk drive. One thing to keep in mind though is the price difference between SSDs and disk drives. SSDs tend to be a little bit more expensive than disk drives, but again, both of them serve the same purpose. So if you're just beginning composing and you just need to have more external storage, I would recommend just getting a disk drive. And again, down the road, you can always upgrade and get an SSD drive. But again, if you're just starting, a disk drive will work just fine. While you can always use your computer's mouse to manually enter MIDI notes, having a MIDI keyboard is going to make your life a lot easier and make your music sound more authentic and realistic. When deciding what type of MIDI keyboard to get, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First, you just need to make sure that the keyboard has keys, but also deciding how many keys do you actually need. MIDI keyboards come in all different sizes from 32 keys all the way up to 88 keys. Having a smaller keyboard like the Komplete Control M32, it is going to be a lot more portable, but it could also be more challenging if you are trying to play larger chords or you're trying to play simultaneously with both your left and your right hand. Having a keyboard like the Komplete Control S88, this is going to give you the full range of a piano, but it's going to be less portable and take up more space. Having a keyboard that has a really good modulation wheel and pitch wheel is very important in the composing world. Using the mod wheel when composing with certain virtual instruments is really going to help your instruments sound more authentic and more realistic, and also a lot more expressive. As an example, I have this library loaded, the Symphony Series String Ensemble, and I'm going to play the same melody twice. The first time, I'm not going to touch the mod wheel, and then the second time, I will use the mod wheel, just so you can hear how much more expressive your instrument's going to sound with a good mod wheel. So this is without using the mod wheel. And here's the same melody again, now using the mod wheel. As you can hear, the mod wheel is changing the volume of the violin sound, but it's also changing its timbre. Beyond keys and a pitch and a mod wheel, a lot of other keyboards offer additional features that could potentially help your composing and your writing process. For example, the Komplete Control S-Series keyboard, the S49, the S61, and the S88, there's a feature called the light guide, which are basically little lights above each individual key on the keyboard. This visual feedback will give you detailed information about particular instruments. For example, if you're using an orchestral instrument, it might tell you where the basses are, cellos, violas, and violins. But also the light guide could be used for a certain feature called the scale mode, which the keyboard will tell you what notes you can and cannot play in a particular scale. This is just an additional feature that can help your composing process. The S-Series also offers two larger screens that let you see certain information about a particular instrument that you have loaded. You're able to see certain parameters that you're tweaking, and you can also browse for your instruments all directly from the keyboard. Other options for MIDI keyboards are the M32 or the A-Series. Both of those types of keyboards, you can also browse for your instruments. You can tweak your sounds, but rather than having the two large screens like the S-Series does, the M and the A-Series have a smaller screen on the left-hand side, which still give you visual information as to what instruments you're browsing or what parameter you're controlling of a particular instrument. Additionally, some keyboards also offer integration with the DAW that you're using. For example, the M, the A, and the S series integrate with a lot of the DAWs out there like Ableton, Logic, Cubase, and Pro Tools, and a few others. This type of integration allows you to control various functions in your DAW directly from the keyboard. For example, being able to adjust the volume of all of your different tracks, being able to mute and solo, navigate through your DAW, and control various transport functions like play, stop, record, even quantizing your MIDI notes and undo and redoing, all from the hardware. So when deciding what type of MIDI keyboard to get, always start with the basics. How many keys do you need? And does it have a mod and a pitch wheel? And then just take a look at all the additional features and just see what feels right to you. At some point, you may want to record an actual instrument like a guitar or a vocalist. And in order for you to get that high quality recording that you need, you can't necessarily rely on your computer's built-in microphone. So for that, what you're going to need is an audio interface. An audio interface is a device that's able to take an audio signal, let's say a guitar player, and convert it into a way that your DAW is able to understand it and record it. Additionally, audio interfaces are able to work in the opposite direction, taking the audio from your DAW and having it go out of the audio interface into your headphones or a pair of speakers. Most interfaces are connected to your computer with a USB cable, so the setup process is fairly simple, but you just want to make sure that the interface is compatible with your computer's specifications, more importantly, your computer's operating system. When choosing an audio interface, what you need to determine is how many inputs you need and how many outputs. Your number of inputs is determined by how many instruments, how many things do you want to record simultaneously. As an example, if you're just going to be recording one instrument at a time, just like a guitar player or a vocalist, then technically you would only need one audio input. If you're trying to record more things simultaneously, let's say a guitar player, a vocalist, and a drummer, then you would need 3 inputs. In some cases, you may need multiple outputs on your audio interface, but if you're just beginning, really you only need one output. However, what is important is making sure that the output connection on the interface matches what you are trying to connect it into, for example, a pair of studio monitors. Next up on the list is investing in a good pair of headphones. Having a good pair of headphones is going to allow you to hear certain things that you probably wouldn't hear if you were just using your laptop speakers. Just like deciding which DAW to get, MIDI keyboards, which virtual instruments to purchase, there are also a lot of headphone options out there. When deciding what pair of headphones you want to get, there are a few things that you just want to be informed about. The first thing is, what is the frequency range of your headphones? What is the lowest frequency that the headphone is able to transmit, and what is the highest frequency? Looking at the tech specs for certain headphones, if you notice that the headphone frequency range, the lowest it can go is, let's say, 100 Hertz, there's still a lot of frequencies below that you're unable to hear in your headphones. So if you're making and composing music using that pair of headphones, you're really not going to be able to understand or hear those lower frequencies. So if you're listening to your music, it may sound good in your headphones, but if you play this in a car or let's say a large theater, there's a lot of frequencies that you didn't hear. So those lower frequencies could be way too loud, or they could just be non-existent. So having a good pair of headphones that has a very large frequency range is going to be very beneficial. Some headphones out there that are meant for listening to music, they've adjusted how the music sounds in your headphones to make the music listening experience more enjoyable. For example, some headphones will just boost the lower frequencies or cut back on some of the higher frequencies just to make the music you're listening to sound better. This can cause an issue if you are writing and composing music using these types of headphones. In your headphones, the bass might sound good because you've adjusted your track so that the bass doesn't sound too boomy. But if you listen to your music in a car or again, a large theater, you may notice that those lower frequencies, those bass sounds are actually a little bit too quiet. So looking for a good pair of studio headphones is very important. Studio headphones were designed to essentially have a flat response. So what you're actually hearing in your headphones is going to be a more accurate representation of how your music would sound in different listening environments. Again, there are tons of headphone companies out there, but in the composing space, some of the more popular companies are Sennheiser, which is actually the pair that I'm currently wearing, the Sennheiser HD650s, but other popular headphone companies are Sony and Beyerdynamics. So when deciding what pair of headphones to get, just take a look at the frequency range and making sure that they are studio headphones and that the pair of headphones isn't boosting or cutting certain frequencies, so you get a better representation of how your music sounds. Piggybacking off of the headphone topic, in addition to having a good pair of headphones, Also, having a good pair of studio monitors is very important when you are composing and just writing music in general. Even though your music may sound good in your headphones, it's always important to listen to your music on different speakers or in different environments. You may notice that if you're listening to your music in the car, maybe the bass is too loud, or maybe it's just non-existent. Studio monitors are built with the purpose of giving you a much more true representation of how your music sounds, a more flat response. As I mentioned, with some pairs of headphones, they may boost or cut back certain frequencies, whereas studio monitors will give you a better representation of how your music sounds. Deciding what pair of studio monitors to get can be a difficult decision, and there's also a lot of contributing factors to how these speakers sound. So first off, understanding what is the frequency range of these speakers. Just like headphones, you want to see what is the lowest frequency the speaker is able to play and what is the highest frequencies. In some instances, you may need a subwoofer, but for the most part, just having a pair of studio monitors will do the trick. Speakers come in all different sizes. You can get really small ones to giant speakers that take up an entire wall. The larger speakers are going to generate more sound. They're just going to sound louder. The bass might sound a little bit heavier, but even having a smaller pair of studio monitors is just another way to listen to your music. One thing to keep in mind with studio monitors is the environment, the space that the speakers will be in. Just as important as the size of the speakers and the frequency range, where the speakers are actually going to be playing your music is also an important factor. If you took the same pair of studio monitors and put them into two different types of rooms, your music's actually going to sound different. If the walls of one room are made with brick as opposed to drywall, the amount of reverb and echo that you hear in your room is going to sound different. Even if you just get some really basic acoustic foam online and just put a couple pieces up around the room, it's going to help absorb any of that excess echo and reverb that you hear in your space. Even if the space that you're composing in is small or it has a little bit too much reverb, it is important just to learn and understand your speakers. The more that you use your speakers, you're going to be able to understand if your music is sounding one way in your space on your speakers, you're going to have a better idea of how it translates into a movie theater or your car or even your pair of headphones. When composing, the ultimate goal is to be able to write music for visual media, a commercial, advertisement, TV show, or a full-length feature film. As a composer, your main role is to write music, but it's also very important to be able to see how does your music sync and line up with the video, the picture that you are working with. So having a tool that allows you to combine your music and the video together is going to be very important. As I mentioned before, some of the DAWs like Ableton, Logic, Cubase, Pro Tools, they all have the option to export your music to the video file. So you would have one video file that would include your music. Something like FL Studio, you can actually load and play back video all within the DAW, but it doesn't have the option to export both the music and video together. So that's where a tool or a program that combines both of them together will be very helpful. There are some free options out there. So for example, on Apple computers, there's this program iMovie, which is completely free, which allows you to easily combine your video and your music together. Best case scenario, the DAW that you're using has the feature of exporting your music to video. But if it doesn't, iMovie is an option, or Adobe Premiere, or another program like DaVinci Resolve. Those programs allow you to combine music and video together. You've finished a piece that you've been working on and it sounds good in your headphones, it sounds good on your studio monitors, but you just start listening to it on different sets of speakers. Maybe it's your car, a portable speaker system, or even your laptop speakers, and you notice that things maybe sound a little muddy, or an instrument is too loud, or you just can't hear it at all. So this is where the process of mixing and mastering comes into play. When pitching your music, the clarity and the loudness of it can be a deciding factor if a producer or a brand wants to actually use your music for a TV show or a commercial, or they're going to pass on it. With certain high budget projects, they may be hiring specific people to fulfill specific roles in the music creation process. So you as a composer, your job might just be composing and writing the music. They then might hire someone that will take your music, convert it into sheet music so that an orchestra or a musician can perform it. And then they may hire a conductor who will actually conduct the orchestra or musician while they're recording your music. If you're just starting composing, or maybe you're working on a much smaller project, some of these responsibilities could fall on you. The mixing process is making sure that all of the elements and the sounds that you're using in your project have space to breathe, that certain things aren't coming in too loud, or certain things are just too quiet and you can't hear it. Certain sounds may also occupy the same frequency range, so if you have too many sounds in the lower frequency range, it can make your music sound too muddy in the low end. The mastering process is kind of putting the finishing touches on your track, enhancing certain sonic characteristics about your song, maybe enhancing the stereo image or adjusting levels and just making sure that your track sounds loud. Again, this can be a deciding factor if someone wants to use your music or they're going to say pass on it. Now, you don't have to be a professional mixing and mastering engineer to make sure that your music sounds clean and it sounds loud. There's a lot of tools out there for mixing and mastering, but if you're looking for something that allows you to quickly mix and master your music and have it actually sound professional, there's a couple tools out there that I would highly recommend. Neutron 4 is a great program to use. It has all of the individual components that you would need to mix your music, but one of the features that I absolutely love using is the Mixing Assistant tool. This actually uses AI technology to automatically kind of mix your sounds, making sure that everything sounds as clean as possible. All you have to do is throw Neutron 4 onto one of your tracks, onto a particular sound, and click the Mixing Assistant button. Then what will happen is Neutron 4 will use AI technology and intelligently determine what modules your sound needs to make sure it sounds as clean as possible. Once your audio has been analyzed, you have this one page that lets you control a lot of the important characteristics of your sound. You can add more punch to your sound, or distortion, or increase the stereo imaging, the width of your sound. Another thing you can control is something called tone matching. Neutron 4 will essentially take your sound and try to match your sound's tone to the target tones that you select on the left-hand side. For orchestral music, they actually have orchestral target tones like strings low and high, and also brass low and high. If you ever want to dive under the hood, you can actually see the individual modules that were applied, and this gives you a little bit more control over your sound and what you're doing to make it sound as clean as possible. Now, for the mastering process, another program from iZotope is Ozone 10, which also has assistive technology to help master your music. Just like Neutron, all you have to do is just throw on Ozone 10 onto your main output, click on the button for the mastering assistant, play your track, and Ozone will automatically add all of the individual modules to make your track sound as loud and clean as possible. Again, you don't have to be a professional mixing and mastering engineer to make your music sound clean and sound loud. You want to make sure that when you are pitching and sending your music out, that whoever is listening to it, regardless of what speaker system they're on, that your music sounds as best as it can. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of the types of tools that you may need if you want to get into composing. Having additional tools can be helpful, but not absolutely required. You don't necessarily need the most expensive string library out there, or you don't need every single synthesizer to actually write good music. Some of the world's best music was created with a pen and a piece of paper. All of these tools that I've mentioned and all the other tools out there, they're really there to help us get the ideas that are in our head onto a computer as quickly as possible. So don't think that not having a specific tool is limiting or hindering your creative ability. All it takes is just one good musical idea. So remember, have fun, and thanks for watching.